as a chef, I think the way I source my food and my ingredients must have a positive impact on the planet.
Food waste is a huge contributor to our food system, and by controlling that and realising that by thinking outside the box and using every single piece of ingredient, we can eradicate food waste.
I try to create recipes that are plant-based to encourage people to incorporate more plants in their diets.
The 2020 World Day to combat desertification and droughts, it's happening in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis. In a few weeks, a virus most likely transmitted through the consumption of a wild animal has brought our global economy to its knees and affected the most vulnerable in society. It has also brought into focus our broken relationship with the planet, particularly the way we use land to produce food, our crops, raise our domesticated animals. And so in rebuilding our economy, let's move forward to a new model based on respect of the environment and sustainable use of natural resources. This is fundamental to secure healthy, nutritious food for all, to contribute to prevent the next pandemic, but also to tackle other global challenges like climate change and nature loss. This is our chance to build a resilient, safe future for us and for all life on Earth.
Hi everyone, welcome to this segment of the online full-day program produced by the United Nations to combat desertification to observe Desertification and Drought Day 2020. This year's focus is on changing public attitudes to the leading drivers of desertification and land degradation, humanity's relentless production and consumption of food. My name is Danny Nierenberg, and I'm president of Food Tank, a nonprofit research organization really dedicated to telling stories of hope and success in the food system. We feature really incredibly innovative ideas that are already working on the ground in cities and kitchens and fields and laboratories and all over the world. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and watch our weekly live discussions with inspiring actors in the food system who are working hard and making progress toward achieving more sustainable food production and ensuring food security for us all. I'm really, really excited to introduce our panelists for today, who will discuss the impacts of desertification and land degradation in the food system, and really, the most importantly, how to mitigate and adapt those impacts through sustainable agriculture. First, we have Dr. Isman Elouafi, the Director General of the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, based in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. She is internationally known as a strong advocate of alternative approaches to ensuring food security and nutrition in marginal environments, including the use of neglected and underutilized crops and non-fresh water resources in agriculture. We also have a good friend to Food Tank, Ms. Joanna Kane-Potaka, the Assistant Director General at ICRISAT and the Executive Director of Smart Food. She's currently working in India. Joanna began her career as an agricultural economist and later moved into market research in the business arena. Since then, she's worked in a wide variety of marketing-related areas, including strategic marketing, communications, fundraising, knowledge management, and the uptake of scientific research. So it's an honor to be with you both. Thank you so much. I know it's such a busy, turbulent, often uncertain time in the world right now, so I appreciate your time. As I mentioned before, both of these experts are really focused on neglected and underutilized crops, which in many ways I think are the crops of the future. And I'm thrilled again and really honored to have their work shared today. The theme of this year's Desertification and Drought Day is food, feed, fiber. And I'm hoping that we can focus on both the human production and consumer angles and practices that lead to desertification and land degradation, and more importantly, really the solutions. So I want this conversation to be very back and forth. I want to have a lot of dialogue. You both know more about these issues than anyone, and I think especially right now with COVID-19 impacting food security worldwide, solving and discussing these issues is more important than ever. So Isman, I'd really like to start with you. Can you describe desertification's impact on food production, and then maybe give us sort of a short description of what your organization does?
So I think describing desertification, I mean, it's quite known. What is really alarming is that in view of the climate change, desertification is going beyond what we have expected for years. So ICBA specializes in what we call marginal environments. And we define marginal environment as areas where you have very little resources, so particularly water. And most of this environment, desertic environment and desertified environment, will be bang on it a marginal environment, but also areas that have very poor soils, that we would call in the old days non-arable land. And to define our mandate better, what we do an overlaying of what we call biophysical marginality of the ecosystem with poverty. So ICBA specializes in finding solutions for those marginal environments, and our focus is to go to countries that have a big strata of poverty and to help them find those solutions. So we start always, the beginning for us, it's always neglected and underutilized species, because the normal species does not produce well in non-arable land in those marginal environments. So when you think about it, most of the staple crop, you take them outside the favorable environment, they produce very little, and hence by default, ICBA has to start from other crops. So the way we do it is that there is a huge number of species that are out there. So as a human being, unfortunately, it seems we like specialization a lot in everything.
Right.
Our education pushes us to be more and more specialized. The higher you go in your education, the more narrow you look at it. And at the same time, our globalization are pushing us all to speak the same languages, English being on the top. But also in terms of food, globalization and the lifestyle that we have is pushing us to eat the same thing. Whereas in nature, there is so much plants. When I always say about 500,000 species only in plants, I'm not talking fishes, we're not talking other animals on the planet, you go to the market right now and you don't find more than 150. So we are leaving 500,000 and we are focusing on 150, and that's wrong. And that's really where, for us, alternative species that works better in certain ecosystem will do far better than banging our head and trying to make staple crops produce better in those environments.
Absolutely.
Discussion, Danielle.
Sure. So Joanna, I mean, you also work on these underutilized crops, these sort of neglected or forgotten crops, but they have so much potential. And I know ICRISAT has started this project called Smart Foods, and you've done a lot to really promote the use and production of millets and sorghums and other crops that have fallen out of favor for a lot of reasons. Sometimes they're considered poor people's food, even though they're very resilient and very nutritious. Can you talk about the advantages of these smart foods?
Sure. Thanks, Danny. Well, I think I'll start with where ICRISAT started, which is about 47, 48 years ago, and how we got to a different way of thinking now. So when ICRISAT started, it was, I mean, we're focused on the dry land, but it was very much about breeding new and improved varieties that were suitable to the dry zones. But really, over the decades, recognizing that any one intervention only really has a full impact as the strength of that whole value chain.
Sure.
And so over time, ICRISAT really has expanded sort of that looking at that whole value chain. So if you look at, say, the soil, any improved variety is not going to have the full impact if you don't have the healthy soil and the whole farm side. And then also recognizing that the whole processing side, the agribusiness, and more recently, looking at the consumer side. So the efforts to date have largely been on farm and the farm production, but really recognizing if we want to drive change, we also have to drive it from the consumer end. And that's received the smallest amount of focus when you talk to any agricultural sort of group. And so it's really bringing together agriculture and food and the consumer a lot stronger. Sure. And that's where smart food came in. It was, it said, well, we want to complement all the major efforts that have gone at the agricultural production end with how can we also influence and drive from the consumer end and what, build the consumer awareness and get them involved and excited and realizing what's out there that they don't realize and their understanding of how all of this interacts and how their decisions can make a really big difference in the world. So smart food was about driving that. And then what we did is we created what we call this smart food triple bottom line. So a lot of companies, I mean, it's been talked about for years now, companies having a triple bottom line. But this is specially designed for the food system. So where we say it should be good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. And I often like to expand that now to say good for those who produce it, because I find that extremely critical to bring in those food processors, and especially the entrepreneurs who are the real pioneers, who are the real social entrepreneurs, who are the ones who are really, they're very genuine and they're real pioneers in making change. And they struggle as much as farmers often because pioneers usually do. So how do we support that and have that triple bottom line?
No, that's really exciting. And you brought up a really interesting point. You said we're trying to bring in agriculture, food, and the consumer. And often, I mean, it's very ironic to me, who's somebody who's studied these issues for, 17 plus years now, that those are sort of siloed issues. The agriculturists are not talking to the nutritionists. Consumers are sort of, we talk about consumer demand, but we don't often understand what it means. So I'm wondering if you can both comment on this need, if we're really going to combat desertification and help mitigate climate change and improve soils, all the things that will enhance food security, how can we break down those silos?
So I think really the silos, there's a lot of gaps in between science and policy that is at the origin of all the discrepancies. And we look at it, it's not only in agriculture, it's across the sectors. There is, again, that specialization that we have in our lifestyle and in our processes as governments, as individuals, as corporates, made us really that there isn't always a link between the two. And over years, particularly in government and in international development, the gap has widened. So when you look at a corporate, for example, they were able to merge it, both of them. So we always say it has to start with a science policy. You should have a policy question. They have a policy question, science for it, and then you implement the solution. what's happening, because we have that discrepancy, we are a lot doing research that is not in use. And it is not in use because it's not responding to a gap that policy recognize. And hence, really, the approach Joanna explained, that's the right one. That's how we should have done it from the beginning. And maybe the intention was there, but over years, you know, I call it always the syndrome of big organization. As we get bigger, we just lose it a little bit. So a value chain approach or a food system that takes everything in consideration is a must. And we did at ICBA, we did a strategy for Kuwait for food security, and we did an investment strategy for them. And what we find out when we look at the numbers is that you look at the numbers and it's of return on investment, and you find out that the farmer, it's the least benefiting from anything.
Right. Ironically,
so
right?
Yes, absolutely. Ironically, it doesn't make sense. So it goes like this, and then it goes up, and then it plateaus. So as you go to middleman, as you go into post-harvest, as you get into processing, and then the highest profit is for supermarket. It doesn't make sense when you think about it. And we are all, as an international organization, ICBA, ICRISAT, and others, we're all working to eradicate poverty, eradicate nutrition, and that's why we do all this. But unless the value chain or the food system, that's a better word for it, it's fixed to make sure that the return investment is well distributed, that the linkages are there, both in terms of science, in terms of policy, in terms of access to markets, and so on and so forth, we won't get to the impact that we are all aiming and working.
Right. Joanna?
Yeah, thanks. I do want to support what Ismahan has said about policy being extremely important. And what we found is we came with smart food trying to see how we can drive it from the consumer end. Consumers aren't in a silo either. Policy significantly affects, so do the food processors, so do the retailers, etc. So you've got to look at how everybody's being impacted. But breaking down the silos is so important. So with the smart food, where we define food with good for you, good for the planet, good for the farmer, they typically often are in 3 silos. And we're saying it's extremely important. Any solutions have to have all those 3 as part of it. So where it's good for you, so your nutrition and health, you often have people working on nutrition and health, and then good for the planet, you've got another group that's working on environment, and then good for the farmer, you've got another group working on agriculture. So how can we find solutions? And all have good solutions, all are worthy work, but every time we create a solution, we should have this triple bottom line and be thinking, right, how are we impacting across all of this? And that's where we find also with actually identifying smart foods themselves. So we've looked at millet, sorghum, legumes, where we say that, well, they are a smart food because they really do contribute nutritionally, and then health-wise, they're hugely valuable. Environmentally, they've got the lower carbon footprint, the legumes that add the nitrogen to the soil, etc. And then good for the farmer because they're resilient, survive with less water, they're climate smart, their risk management strategy, etc. So they cut across those areas. But then we always say, but it's not necessarily good for the farmer if we can't develop those value chains and create the markets. So we have to help do that to drive it. And I was really excited when I was reading some of the work of, especially for this day, for UNCDD. I mean, they're more of an environmental organization, yet I was quite excited to see they were talking about consumers and changing consumer habits and food waste, and they were really looking at things more holistically as well. So it was really exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's really changed over the last decade. You see more of this silo breaking for sure, but also this holistic approach that it's not just environment, it's not just food, it's not just nutrition, it's all of these things really need to be brought together. And Ismahan brought up this really important point that a lot of research is being done that's not in use, right? That, there's research people, well-meaning, research organizations come in and sort of, have this idea that they can tell a community what it what it needs, but without asking that community. And so you see this shift in participatory research. And I think this is especially important on this day when we're talking about desertification. You have to really involve communities. So for both of you, I'm interested in how you see the role of technology in being able to mitigate desertification and land degradation. And Isman, I'm hoping you can go first. What is the role of technology, and what kinds of technologies do you think may or may not work?
I think, Danielle, we don't have anymore the luxury of saying we could plan it again, we could do this and try that and try that.
Sure.
We do have targets by 2030, and we are completely off track. We all know it, and some of the targets are really related to desertification and environmental services and balancing the nature and stop degrading it the way we are doing it. So that's why I think, because of the need, we might be in a better position to use innovation, because in the longest time, we know about new technologies. We are not blunt into using them. We are not investing enough in putting them on the ground, trying them, fine-tuning them at a larger scale. But I think right now, if we really are serious about the targets of 2030, the SDGs, we have to do it. And in one of days, I have been saying for a few years now that really we are at the best time to really kickstart our fourth industrial revolution. Because right now we have the data, we have the know-how, better than any other time. I did my PhD in genetics, and I love really working on genetics and knowing more about plants. And with that, we have now all the technologies, the omic technologies. We have the big data, we have the G5, we have the Internet of Things. So we have much more data than ever. We understand it better. We have better models to understand it as well, and to predict, if we put it in this environment, what it's going to be. So I think really we need more investment in development per se, more investment in taking this science to have real product. So if you talk to a private sector, they all know to breed a crop, it used to take them about $100 million to have one variety, to get from the research to the market. In one of days, it's much less. I don't have the numbers, but it's much less. And that's why you look at most of the South countries, they used to take varieties that were bred somewhere else, because it was just way too costly for government to do it. But in one of days, I think it's not the same. You could start from breeding material that come from ecrisite if it's millet, or could from any other center, or on quinoa if it comes from ICBA, if it's quinoa from ICBA, or other centers, but you can customize it in a better way that it gives you the best productivity. And that's really one of the uses of technology that we should look at. It's develop the right to provide varieties for those ecosystems and develop the food system within the same country. So if, for example, we're talking about a new variety of quinoa or millet, you need the seed system to pick it up in the country to produce it. Otherwise, if it comes from far away, it's going to be way too expensive. If you are putting in place a new irrigation system, let's see in Mali, for example, you need to have the value chain of the irrigation system in the country. So it is a bit puzzling to know that most of the things cost much more in Africa than anywhere else. So you talk about tubes of irrigation, you talk about seeds, you talk about an enzyme for research. It's way too expensive because you add up all the transportation and the whole value chain that is all across the world, except in that country or the neighborhood country. So I think we have to think in the system itself, and we have to shake the system. We have to understand that we are not using the most efficient food system or distribution system at large. And we need to change it if we want to get to 2030. Otherwise, it's going to be another fiasco. Then we get another agenda for another 15, 20 years.
Sure. I mean, I think the urgency of these issues makes the use of different innovations very attractive. But Joanna, I'm interested in hearing from you, because I know you work with a lot of smallholder and medium-sized farmers, and often technology is looked at as a silver bullet, and you know, that it can solve all problems. But I have sort of, you know, been interested in this intersection of high and low tech, you know, using indigenous and traditional knowledge and combining it with some of the things Isman was describing, big data and things like that. And I'm wondering what your perspective is.
Yeah, Danielle, I think we can do that. And I see a big opportunity really at the consumer end for this. So, for example, using technology for traceability. Now, everyone knows about traceability, but it's not very well used and integrated at the moment. Maybe the big companies that have the ability. How can we use this for those indigenous crops, the underutilized crops, the small players who are behind it, who don't have the big money to bring in the traceability? How can, and governments can play a key role. So how can we bring traceability in to show a real triple bottom line and to bring forward the smart foods, the underutilized crops, etc.? So I think this is one big area where we really can support it, and technology is needed for that. I think another huge area for technology is at the wholesaling end. And again, this supports what you're saying with how do we support the smallholder farmers, indigenous foods, etc. It's a way how we use technology to connect farmer closer to consumers. And technology is critical for that. So I think that's another big area. There's huge potential we haven't tapped. And the third area I'd say is more on the consumer knowledge and awareness side.
Right.
And we can use technology for that, but not just get information to them. How can we make it more experiential? How can we do it differently? And I mean, what I would love to see, might sound like a way out idea, but what I would love to see is in retail, how could we have like a smart food section in retail? There's not just a health food section. It's a section that's got that triple bottom line.
Nice.
And consumers enter that section and that it's an experience, and they learn and it's exciting and they get a buzz and they know they're helping the planet and the farm, the smallholder farmer, and they see the traceability and they learn about the food. And this is something doesn't exist. How could we create that? Now, you'd need the traceability, you need all that digital technology, but it's not just another shelf. And of course, it can be an online or it can be bricks and mortar retail. We need to think out of the box. And I like what Isman said about we need to shake things up. We really, really need to. We're not hitting the targets. Everyone's working really hard. Lots of fantastic work is being done, but every now and again you do have to do a shake up. So and think out of the box. And
I think we are at a good time to really make it work, because as Joanna said, we got like all the pieces of the puzzle right now. And particularly the fact we have the technology, the need is there, no doubt about it. We have very young population that is much more interested now for using and be part of the solution. We have the awareness right now on nutrition. Like 20 years ago, we talked to people about nutrition and they're like, what's this? It's not a big issue. Not a big issue. They recognize the malnourishment, they recognize the issue with obesity as well. So I think we have all the pieces, and particularly youth. If we get you to be excited about agriculture or agripreneur or food per se as a concept. So if we get them really to be interested, I think we could come up with a really very, very nice solution that could make a difference in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that storytelling angle is so good for this. And maybe, you know, for our last question, I'd like to go back to this idea of sort of combining science and policy, because I feel like the storytelling angle that you both just talked about, really, you know, translating this to consumers and especially youth who want to be part of the solutions. How can we tell this story better to policymakers and get them to make the changes that are really necessary?
Joanna, you want to go first?
Easy question.
Let's answer her.
Okay. Actually, you know what? I think that's a really, really good point, Danielle. We talk about storytelling to consumers. We rarely talk about storytelling to policymakers. We send policy briefs.
Sure.
And so how do we make it exciting? Because even when we've talked about how do we popularize foods like millets and sorghum, you know, we've always said, you've got to create a buzz around it. You know, you've got to make it exciting. Well, you know, how do we approach policy making and do it in a different way and make it exciting, and excite them, and then it's an easier a sell as part of that as well. And we've got to do that, showing the links, showing the potential, bringing new ideas and opportunities there as well. Yeah.
And maybe to add to what Joanna said, I think if we could put a tag, a dollar number on it, this is really attract a lot of attention. So with the policymakers, they have to understand, like nutrition issues. If you have a nutrition issue, if you don't solve it when the kids are really below the 1,000 days, you get so much that you have to pay for health issues. So we have to fix the system, because the food system maybe was needed as is. When we have at the beginning of our green revolution, we needed to feed more. So in the 60s and 70s, the green revolution started, and then we put a lot of input. We had mostly few staple crops, and that have really reduced the poverty per se. But right now, the issue of nutrition, it's overriding. And hence, maybe the only way for us for nutrition, it's really a holistic diet, of course. But in that holistic diet, you need to really to enlarge your plant-based diet, and you need to go back to those neglected and underutilized species that, be it millet, be it sorghum, be it quinoa, be it fonio, all of them are much more nutritious. And the numbers are very clear. So I think for policymakers, it's we can get numbers. The numbers attract their attention much more than anything else. Like for the gender, we were talking about the gender issue in the MENA region a few days ago in a talk with the FAO. And really, like in the MENA region, I was looking at the MENA region. If we bring in the women to the workforce, they are about 18% only right now. You get about $1 trillion more in the region. So you can your GDP by bringing women to the workforce. They are already educated. They have already the skills. They're not in the work. So if we can get with the malnutrition and with the broken food system we have, if we can bring numbers, like hard numbers, economic numbers, that will show if millet is used more in Senegal and not being just for the rich people in Senegal right now. If we make it a larger scale instead of rice, because it's a better crop for the ecosystem in rice, this is the numbers. This is how many less malnutrition you will have. This is more money in the pocket of the farmer. This is more employment for the youth, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, absolutely. That story has to include the economic numbers for sure. And I think during this era of COVID-19, talking about nutrition and these better foods that improve immunity is really going to be important. Joanna, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to give a couple of policy examples actually. So, and a great different way to sell to policymakers. So our team, ICRISAT team in Niger, approached the government, and rather than just try to promote the value of millets, etc., which they did do, what they did is they suggested that the country have an annual millet festival. And the First Lady got very excited, so she became a Smart Food Ambassador, which got presented on the day. Last year they held their first ever national millet fair, and they're doing it every year now, and the First Lady is always there. She asked us to train the president's chefs in how to cook with millets, so we had a big training session this year. And so, you know, it made it fun, it created a buzz around it, you know, and then it got involved everyone from chefs to consumers to processors to the researchers to policymakers. It helped break down the barriers too by making it a fair. So, I mean, that was a more creative way to engage with policymakers. And I'll give it just one more example. So we approached one of the ministers of agriculture in one of the states in India. This was a number of years ago. And ministers of agriculture typically focus on the agricultural production. That's typically their remit.
Sure.
So we pitched about how about looking at the whole consumer side and processes and driving the demand for your farmer's product. And he was a particularly innovative minister. So, and he really took that on. And it was the first time ever a minister changed his whole strategy to include consumers and processors. And he started India's first ever annual millet fair. And really broke down the barriers and brought in people from different areas. So, I mean, these are just different ways to really engage with policymakers.
Sure. Isman, I know that we're both part of the Food Forever project. I wanted to give you a chance to just describe it quickly as well.
So it's a great initiative. I'm really very delighted to be part of it. I think really there are different initiatives that took place to just bring attention to neglected and underutilized species. But I think Food Forever gets that policy component as well. We have a lot of that are policymakers themselves. So it's really that's what we were lacking. It's really gets both the policymakers, the researcher, the farmers, the private sector, the consumers, all to focus on one point. And hopefully through Food Forever and other initiatives, we could get there. But I think it is, in my mind, it's like it's really an alarm that has waken up all. And I like very much the level of awareness we see right now in the population, although we're still eating too much of a junk food, but at least it's coming there. I mean, I could see the population and the consumers and the youth particularly moving there and getting to understand it. My little one, she's only 12 and she is really everything she eats. And I love that.
That's fantastic. And thanks to the Crop Trust for their work on the Food Forever initiative. I also want to thank both of these amazing panelists. This has been such a rich conversation and so inspiring, and really pinpoints the urgency of these issues and the need to act now, but with some concrete solutions. So thank you both so much for joining us today. I want to remind everyone to please stay tuned. There's still more than 5 hours of content left to be streamed on this Desertification and Drought Day at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't miss the ministerial panel moderated by Executive Secretary at UNCCD, Ibrahim Tia. Thank you both so much. Everyone stay safe and well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
My name is Megha Kohli and I'm a chef in New Delhi, and I believe that our food choices can help fix the planet.
Where do you get muscles? Show me. Yeah.
At the restaurant, we try to use as many parts of the fruit or vegetable that we can. We maintain a strict spoilage register. You may say that you're championing food waste, or you may say that the cause is very dear to your heart. But if you're giving very, very large portions to your diners, then food is going to end up getting wasted. So I feel that most restaurants should start giving a half portion menu.